In New Orleans, they called him the voodoo wizard of music. On stage, Dr. John was dazzling and mysterious, like a figure stepped out of legend. But behind the makeup and the applause was a life marked by scars from barroom fights, the shadow of underworld figures, and a gunshot that once nearly cost him the hand he played with. In June of 2019, news of his death was released in just a few short lines. No photographs from his final moments, no clear explanation of his days in the hospital. One old friend recalled, someone had taken his phone just before the news broke, and strangely, a notebook filled with unreleased songs also vanished from his room. He left this world the same way he lived, surrounded by mystery, with unanswered questions hanging in the air. What truly happened in Dr. John's final days? Stay with us, and we'll trace every last clue. Chapter 1. The bullet that ended a dream and opened a road no one expected. In Jacksonville, in the late 1950s, a gunshot rang out inside a small bar, and the rumors that followed would never appear in any police file. That night, Malcolm John Rebennack, later known to the world as Dr. John, was just 18, playing guitar on a cramped stage. In the dark corner, 3 known men sat in silence. In the music circles, everyone knew they controlled many of the nightclubs, lent money to musicians at steep terms, and sometimes made troublemakers disappear. They weren't there for the music. They were there to be seen. A few weeks earlier, at a nightclub in New Orleans, Mac had refused to pay a fee that everyone in the business quietly understood. Soon after, his guitar was smashed, followed by a cold warning. One day, you won't be standing on that stage anymore. Back in Jacksonville, the song was mid-chorus when the sound of a chair hitting the floor cut through. Glass shattered, curses flew. Then, bang! A gunshot ripped through the music, tearing into Mac's left hand. The ring finger, the one that pressed the strings, was shredded. Blood dripped down the guitar's neck, seeping into the worn wood. But here's the strangest part. The gun was never found. No one in the bar could identify the shooter. Or, no one dared. One witness swore he saw the man slip out the back door into a black car with the engine running. That statement never made it into the official report. Police declared there was insufficient evidence. But Mac, now robbed of his ability to play guitar, knew one thing for certain. That gun disappeared far too quickly, as if someone had cleared the path in advance. He spent weeks in the hospital. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. You'll never play guitar the way you used to. For a young musician, it was a sentence worse than prison. After his release, he tried to play again, but the familiar chords became torture. Eventually, the guitar was left in the corner. Mac turned to the piano, teaching himself chord by chord with his good hand. At first, the notes were clumsy. Then came the thick, weighty sound that carried the soul of New Orleans. That night in Jacksonville had changed everything. One bullet didn't just destroy a finger. It erased an entire path, forcing Mac onto a new one, a road that would eventually make him Dr. John. Yet the shadow of that missing gun never left him. And the question still hangs in the air. Was it a random accident or a plan set in motion long before, with the weapon simply erased from the world the moment its job was done? Chapter 2. The birth of Dr. John, stagecraft, or a real ritual. In 1967, in Los Angeles, a music project was born. And from the very beginning, some believed it was more than just music. After the Jacksonville shooting and a stint in prison for drugs, Mac left New Orleans. He slipped into the world of LA session musicians, playing for anyone who would pay. Sonny and Cher, Canned Heat, Frank Zappa. The work was steady, but Mac knew he was just another name on a long list of hired players. If I disappeared tomorrow, nobody would notice, he once said. It was then that the idea of Dr. John emerged. At first, it wasn't meant for Mac. The role was designed for his close friend Ronnie Barron, a man whose voice and style fit the image of a Louisiana witch doctor. The inspiration came from a real historical figure, Dr. John Montanet, a Senegalese-born voodoo priest in 19th century New Orleans, famous for his mysterious rites and his ability to hypnotize crowds. But Ronnie backed out at the last moment. Instead of shelving the project, Mac stepped into the role himself. Feathered headdress, amulets, charms, cane, and that gravelly voice that seemed to echo straight from the Mississippi swamps. When the album Gris debuted, it shocked everyone. It sounded like nothing else on the radio. Voodoo rhythms, laced with psychedelic tones, tribal drums, eerie guitar, lyrics like whispered spells. Some critics called it a strange and mesmerizing breakthrough. Others murmured, some of those lines sound like a real ceremony. One studio technician claimed the original demo included Creole phrases he couldn't understand, but that sent chills down his spine. Later, those lines were replaced, and no one ever explained why. I asked Mac, he said, and he just looked at me and smiled. A backstage crew member recalled that before one performance, Mac asked for all the lights to be turned off for 30 seconds to greet the spirits. When they came back on, he was already standing center stage, eyes closed, as if he'd just completed a private ritual. Some say it was all stagecraft, a calculated act to build a brand. Others believe at least part of it was real ritual, altered just enough to be safe for an audience, but still holding a core only he understood. The more he performed, the more the night tripper persona consumed Mac. He began appearing everywhere as Dr. John, not just on stage. One night, I ran into him at a bar. A friend said he still had on the feathered headdress, the amulet, and spoke like he was behind a microphone. The success of Gris didn't come from chart rankings. It came from a quiet influence that made musicians curious, and some uneasy. As one journalist wrote, "This man is bringing New Orleans to Los Angeles, but what he's carrying isn't just music." So what do you think? Was it all theater and marketing? Or was Mac using music to open a door to another world, a world only he knew how to leave? Chapter 3, The Height of Fame, and the Abyss Behind the Lights. In 1973, Right Place, Wrong Time took Dr. John straight to the top. The song landed in the Billboard Top 10, played endlessly on radio stations from cafes in New Orleans to parties in New York. Television crowned him the face of New Orleans, and every performance became a living voodoo celebration before thousands of fans. But the spotlight was only half the story. Behind the scenes, Mac's life was a different spiral: heroin addiction, sleepless nights, and broken relationships. He had been to prison, gone through rehab, only to return again to the needle and the silver spoon. "The stage is my oxygen," he once told a friend. "But the drugs, they get me through the rest of the day." An old girlfriend left behind a letter, never sent, later found in a box of keepsakes. It read, "You can't sleep without the sound of the crowd. And when that sound stops, you look for the sound of the needle hitting the spoon." No one knows if Mac ever read it again, but it spoke a truth he rarely admitted. With a relentless tour schedule, Dr. John remained the center of attention even after the stage lights went dark. Some nights, he would still wear the feathered headdress and amulet into a bar, as if the night tripper persona had swallowed the man beneath. In the music circles, people began to wonder, was he performing to live or living to perform? At the height of his success, there was something few knew. Some members of his crew believed there were songs he refused to play again. One sound engineer recalled a night when the audience shouted, "For I Walk on Gilded Splinters," a signature piece, but he declined. When asked why, he simply said, "Some things are best left alone." The press didn't ignore the shadows. A Los Angeles Times article hinted that his ties to voodoo went deeper than image. It recounted a performance in San Francisco where the stage lights went out for half a minute, and when they came back on, an ornament from the piano had vanished. No one explained it. He didn't deny it. Stranger still was the way he handled success. Even at the peak, Mac never built much wealth. Money disappeared quickly, on instruments, on friends, on unaccounted expenses his accountants preferred not to discuss. Can you picture it? A man celebrated around the world, yet living in modest hotels with a suitcase he never fully unpacked. Brilliant and fragile. And so the question lingers, was Dr. John savoring his time at the top? or using the spotlight to hide a deep abyss he didn't want anyone to see. Chapter 4: Family Loss and Recordings No One Has Heard. Even at the height of his career, Mac was not spared life's hardest blows. And for him, those blows came from where he was most vulnerable: his family. On the day they buried his son Craig, the skies over New Orleans were gray, with a light, steady rain. There were no media cameras, no long lines of fans, just a few close friends, a few family members, standing in silence around the casket. Mac wore a dark coat. The familiar feathered headdress was nowhere in sight. He looked down at the ground, his eyes red but dry. A few years later, he lost another child, Jessica. The shock came again, but this time it was even quieter. No crowded funeral, no news coverage. Just a brief word passed among those close to him. A longtime friend recalled that after Jessica's funeral, Mac disappeared for several days. When he returned, he stepped out of his private studio, holding a few reel-to-reel tapes. No labels, no dates. He placed them in a locked cabinet and never spoke of them again. When the friend asked, "What are those?" Mac gave a faint smile. "Just something I need to keep." No one but him knew what was on them. Were they unfinished songs? Farewell messages to the ones he lost? Or something he didn't want anyone else to hear? In those years, Mac became more withdrawn. The tour dates were still there, but the spaces between shows grew longer. He spent more time at home, rarely receiving visitors. One sound engineer who worked with him said Mac would often play the same musical passage over and over in the studio, almost obsessively. When asked why, he would only say, "One day, it'll find its place." That day never came. The losses didn't end with his children. A few brief relationships also ended in silence. Some partners left because they couldn't handle his unsettled way of living. Others said Mac always kept part of his mind somewhere else. One musician who had worked with him once noticed an old photograph on Mac's desk. Mac with Craig and Jessica, but the picture was folded at one corner, hiding someone who stood beside them. When asked, Mac simply changed the subject. Can you imagine? A man who carried the music of New Orleans to the world, yet when he lost the people he loved most, he said nothing. And so the question at the end of this chapter still lingers. What was on those unlabeled tapes? And why did Mac choose to keep them to himself instead of sharing them with the world? Chapter 5: Stepping onto the stage when his strength was gone. In his final years, John walked onto a stage. Audiences could see it. The lights were still bright, but his strength was no longer the same. One fan wrote on Reddit about seeing him at a small show just a few years before his passing. He came on stage with a cane, guided to the piano bench. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. But when the keys began to sing, the sound was still rich, still pure New Orleans. He was frail, but still badass, the fan wrote. Some nights, his voice was raspy, the lyrics swallowed into breath, but he never canceled a show. A backstage technician recalled him saying, "If I'm not on stage, I don't know who I am anymore." Still, some in his crew believed he knew these were his final performances. The tour schedule grew shorter, limited to select dates. After each show, he lingered longer, watching the audience leave as if he wanted to remember every face. One moment that stayed with many happened at a New Orleans concert. After the final song, he stood, placed a hand over his heart, and bowed deeply. No goodbye. No encore. When the crowd called his name, he simply smiled, then turned and disappeared into the wings. A band member said that before that show, he had asked for the stage lights to be turned off for a full minute. When they came back on, he was already seated at the piano, eyes closed, hands resting on the keys. No one knew what he had done or thought during that darkness. His health was an open secret. The press never reported illness, but those close to him knew he was tired, moving with difficulty, sometimes needing to pause mid-show. Once, he vanished backstage for over 20 minutes, then returned as if nothing had happened. Even so, Mac never said, "That's enough." Instead, he told people, "As long as there's someone listening, I'll keep playing. Can you picture it? A man who once had the world in the palm of his hand, now needing a cane just to reach the stage, yet refusing to step away from the light. And so, the question remains, did he truly not know these were his final shows? Or had he been quietly preparing for a farewell only he understood? Chapter 6. The Farewell Album and the Question of the Final Note. In 2018, with his health in clear decline, Dr. John began a project he called his longtime dream, a country and western album, the kind of music he had loved since childhood, but had never fully explored. The project was titled Things Happen That Way. That day, in the New Orleans studio, the atmosphere was unusually still. There were no raucous jam sessions, no cigarette smoke, no bursts of laughter. Just Mac, his piano, and a few close friends, Willie Nelson, Aaron Neville, Lucas Nelson, and Promise of the Real. One technician recalled that as they started recording the first track, Mac stopped halfway through, sitting in silence for nearly a minute. Then he said quietly, "This will be the last time I do this." No one in the room asked what he meant, but the words cast a hush over the rest of the session. He recorded most of the songs, but never finished them all. Some days, he would only get through a few lines before stopping. At times, he would leave the studio and head home without explanation. A member of the crew later said it felt as though Mac was choosing each track carefully, as if only certain songs were meant to be heard. Then, in June of 2019, Dr. John passed away. The album was left unfinished. His daughter Carla took on the responsibility of completing it. She worked with the production team to edit, add final touches, and in 2022, Things Happen That Way was finally released. The album was praised. His gravelly voice, wrapped around simple country melodies, touched listeners deeply. Yet among his fans, there were questions that didn't have easy answers. Some wrote in online forums, "I love this album, but I wonder, how much of it is really Dr. John, and how much was decided by others?" One musician who had been part of the recording quietly shared that a few tracks Mac had loved never made it onto the album. "Where they are now, I don't know," he said, "but I think Mac set them aside for a reason." What reason? No one is sure. Perhaps he wasn't satisfied with the recordings, or perhaps they carried a deeply personal meaning, like those unlabeled tapes he kept after Jessica's funeral. The album stands as a farewell, but also as a slightly open door into Mac's private world, a place no one but he was ever allowed to enter. Can you imagine? A man who spent his life performing for the public, yet chose to let his final notes remain in silence. And so, the last question of this chapter still hangs. Who truly played the final note? Dr. John, or the other hands that decided what the world would hear? Epilogue, a dazzling legend, and an unfillable void. On June 6, 2019, Dr. John passed away at the age of 77. The family statement was brief. He died of a heart attack in New Orleans. No photographs, no further details. The final chapter of his life closed quietly, just as he had always kept certain parts of himself hidden. He left behind a musical legacy few could match. 6 Grammy Awards, a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and dozens of albums blending voodoo, blues, rock, and jazz. Dr. John wasn't just a musician. He was the living embodiment of New Orleans on stage, brilliant and mysterious. But alongside the lights were shadows that never lifted. A bullet in Jacksonville, and a gun that vanished without a trace. A witness claiming their statement was erased from the record. The story never explained. The cryptic lyrics in Gree Gree, altered at the last minute. Certain songs he refused to perform again, saying only, "Best to leave it alone." 2 children lost before him, Craig and Jessica, and the unlabeled tapes he kept hidden. No one heard them. No one knew what they contained. Moments when the stage lights went dark, whether for a pause or for a private ritual, no one could say. And the final album, Things Happen That Way, completed only after his death, leaving the question, how much was truly his choice, and how much was decided by others? They were like scattered missing pieces throughout his life. Perhaps he wanted them to remain that way. One friend once said, Mac knew a legend needs space. He left questions for people to keep searching, not answers to settle the search. Those who knew him best remembered Mac as generous, funny, always ready to help anyone. But there were also moments when he closed himself off completely, sitting alone at the piano, playing a melody no one recognized. Perhaps it was a song he would never share. Can you imagine? A man who spent his life under the spotlight, yet kept his deepest truths in silence. And maybe that silence was the truest part of Dr. John. When the voodoo haze faded, the lights went out, and the audience drifted away. There was only the piano, a few forgotten amulets, and an emptiness that could never be filled. And the final question, one that may never be answered. What secrets did Dr. John take with him? And do we truly want to know, or should they remain forever as part of the legend?